I wanted to get a video out this week, but I didn't have time to finish the longer painting guide I'm currently working on, so I thought it might be fun to do sort of a one-day painting guide where I paint this entire model today and go through everything I do on it. I was thinking I could do some techniques for rusted and oxidized metal on the metal armor. This is a Loonboss, which is one of the leader characters from the Gloomspite Gitz, and he's got a lot of really interesting little metal bits and mushroom bits that I think would be fun to paint. You can see I've already done all of the underpainting on this model. If you want to see more on how I do underpainting, you can check out my video on underpainting with an airbrush, or you can check out Hobby Basics 102, where I show you how to do the same thing without an airbrush. So without further ado, let's get started on painting this model. So the first thing we're going to do is paint a base coat on all of the metal parts. Whether we're going to have all of the metal colored silver or not, I'm going to base coat all of it in a silver because, well, you'll see why eventually, but I'm going to do that first. And in order to do that, we're going to use a non-wet palette, so just a piece of plastic as our palette, and we're going to use the pickle jar, which is what I use for my metallic paints. I would recommend you have a separate jar for your metallic paints because it's gonna look like this and it will contaminate the colors of your normal paints if you're using the same water jar you usually use. So I'm just going to shake up our paint, put some on our palette using our mixing brush. I'm just gonna mix in a bit of water. I want this to be a fairly thin mixture. Because I've already done a lot of shading and I don't want this to be too thick of a coat. I want to use a brush that's not too nice of a brush so that I don't ruin it. Yeah, that'll work. So you have kind of a nice thin mixture. You can see it's a bit watery. I've got my paper towel here to wipe some off on. And I'm just going to go through and put a light coat of this color over all of the existing underpainting. We don't want to have a thick coat because thick coats of metallic paints tend to look kind of bad. So I'm just going to go very thin with this. The goal here is to just add a bit of a metallic sheen to the existing shading. We don't want it to look too chunky. That's why we're wiping off a lot of the paint on our paper towel. And we're just going to slowly, carefully lay down the metallic paints. Everywhere that we want to look metallic. And we can use our empty brush to take off some of the paint if there's too much or we think it's looking a little bit too chunky. We kind of want just that metallic sheen. That's kind of all we're going for with this coat. And later on, I'm going to use a few other metallic colors to make it a bit more interesting. But for our base coat, just want to start with something like this. Quick and easy. And we've already done most of the hard work with the underpainting. So we don't really have to think about the shading at this point. I used to prefer doing non-metallic metals over using metallic paints. But lately I've been really enjoying using metallics. I think I've just become more comfortable with them. So now that we have base coated all the metal parts in oily steel, we can move on to adding some other metallic colors to sort of vary up the armor a little bit. In the lore, the helmet here is supposed to look like a crescent moon, so I thought it might be fun to paint this in sort of a gold color. So I think I'm going to take some gold paint and paint the helmet on top of this, as well as maybe some of the other pieces to sort of vary up the armor a little bit. So the color I'm going to use is Vallejo Game Color Glorious Gold. We're going to shake up our color, and we're going to do the same thing as with the silver. Put it onto our palette, and then we're going to just thin it down with some water. Till it's nice and thin. So what we're going to do to create sort of a more messy looking effect, I guess, or a more varied looking effect, is we're not going to paint the gold all over the helmet. We're just going to kind of mix in little bits of gold, letting some of the silver show through underneath. I find this helps to create a more natural looking result. So it's not all just one color, if you see what I mean. Because this is a goblin character, I don't want him to have really pristine looking armor, so I don't really want him to have a gold helmet so much as a yellowy colored. So we want to kind of mix up the metal colors, create kind of a dappled looking effect. I think can be kind of interesting. So you can see why I base coated everything in silver, so that we can sort of vary it up like this when we add other metallic colors on top. So in addition to the helmet, I'm going to paint this in this color, this little nubbin. And then I think I'm also going to paint the shoes in this color, because they're also kind of curved and remind me of the moon. You can kind of do whatever you want with characters like this, because their armor's kind of cobbled together. It's good to have, just leave some variety. Okay, so now that we have all of our base metallics down, we can start to have some fun with the metallics. But I think it might actually make more sense to base coat all of the colors before we do any sort of weathering. So I think next I'm going to paint the goblin skin tone. So for this skin tone, we're going to use a lime green color. And I think I'm going to switch to my wet palette. So now that we're doing non-metallic colors, we're going to switch to a different water jar. So the jam jar is going to be our non-metallic water, and this will be our pickles will be our metallic water. And we're going to use a different brush just to try and keep the metallics separate from the other colors. so that none of that glitter gets into our other colors. We're going to use lime green and our wet palette. So I'm going to just put some lime green down here and a few drops of glaze medium. And just take a little bit, wipe it off, and I'm just going to go in and base coat any of the exposed skin with lime green. Which I think is a really nice color for goblins. And because we've thinned it down with glaze medium, all of our underpainting underneath is still going to show through. You can see how quick and easy it is to get a nice looking result when the underpainting's already done. The model's starting to come together now. And the legs. I love that this goblin is wearing the equivalent of shorts, metal shorts, where his little thighs are exposed. It's kind of funny. Okay. That's pretty much it. And I guess there's a little bit of exposed skin right there. The ears are exposed. So for the haft on the weapon, I'm going to use a cavalry brown, which is a nice warm reddish brown. A little bit of it. Add a bit of glaze medium. And this will contrast nicely with the green skin tone. Not only because it's red, but because it's a dark red. Whereas the skin is a light color, a light green. So yeah, that'll look good. Okay. That's most of it. One of the reasons I like this brush is it's very long. It's really good at getting into those little crevices. I guess I should say that this brush and this handle were given to me by Red Grass Games. So thank you for sending me the free products. I really like this brush quite a lot. I'm used to using watercolor brushes from the art store, but this is the first time I've used like a brush that's specifically branded for miniatures, and I quite like it. Alright, so the next step, we could base coat the other mushrooms and things, but I think I might leave that for last. So maybe we can start in on the weathering and the shading on the armor. So I want some of the armor parts to have a blue tinge to it. So I want each of the parts of the armor to sort of stand out as being different looking. So I'm going to be using a Citadel technical paint called Nighthaunt Gloom, which I don't actually use for any of my night haunts, but I use it a lot for other stuff. So I'm just going to take a little bit out of it straight out of the pot, wipe it off my brush, and I think I want the weapon to be this sort of blue color. I'm just going to run it over the entirety of the blade. And then I wiped off the paint, and then I'm just going to use my wet brush to remove some of it. I'm not really sure how to describe the consistency of this paint. It's kind of like a glaze. It's not quite the consistency of a shade, but I think it's great for giving a bit of a blue tinge to things. So there we go. Kind of fun. And then I think we're also going to use this on maybe the chest plate. Let's give the chest plate a bit of color. I don't really like using straight up silver and gold types of armor. There's a lot of other things we can... Oh, some of it got on the wrist guard, so I might as well just add a bit more. I don't really have any method for this. I just kind of... Because it's a paint that doesn't dry super quick, you can kind of just play with it on the surface until it looks right. Until you get the result that you're looking for. If we add too much, we can always go back to our silver paint and add more silver. So let's paint the other side of the weapon. Maybe we'll add a little bit of blue to the back here. Maybe the leg plates or the thigh plates. Just add a little bit of blue. Just a hint. Just to kind of add some variety to the armor. Yeah, that's fun. I'm just going a bit wild with it now. I'm putting a little bit everywhere. Actually, I quite like that. Maybe put some on here, near the gold. It's kind of a fun look. Maybe we'll even put some on the helmet. Actually, yeah, this looks really good against the gold. Kind of has like a verdigris kind of feel to it. Love that. Okay, so I'm using a lot more of this than I thought I would, but just in small amounts everywhere. Kind of ties the armor together. It's fun. It's kind of fun to paint something without a real plan. I just woke up this morning and I was like, let's do a painting guide without any real plans. Thought it would be fun to just paint something spontaneously. So that's probably enough of this blue color. Now, I think what we're going to do is deepen some of the shadows. So I'm going to use a little bit of Nuln Oil. And we're just going to selectively shade parts of the armor. Wiping off our brush to not get too much. I think we're just going to shade any of the crevices with Nuln Oil. Especially the separations between the plates of armor. It's a good place to put the Nuln Oil. Just increasing the contrast between the armor and everything else. You could probably do these weathering steps in any order. You probably could have used the Nuln Oil first and then the Nighthaunt Gloom. I'm just kind of being spontaneous, painting in whatever order occurs to me. Which I think is a good way to experiment and find out new ways of painting things. Okay. That's probably enough Nuln Oil. So now I think we could probably highlight some of the armor. So I'm going to go and use, I think I'm going to take some of our old friend Pale Sand and use it to highlight bits of the armor. Actually, no, I'm not using Pale Sand. I'm going to use pale blue to go with the blue theme. When you're highlighting metallics, you don't always have to use metallic colors, especially if you're thinning them down. You can use any colors you want to highlight metallics as long as they kind of look like it would work. I find part of making metallics look good is to not only use metallic paints to mix it mix it together with other paints so it look more natural. Okay, so I just mix together a glaze, wipe it off, and we're just going to highlight the blade with this bright pale blue color. You can go as far with this as you want. I'm just going to pick out the edges and maybe create some ridges here. We'll add some interest to the model. Will help make this blade look scarier. Just highlight any parts that we want to stand out. I guess technically we want this interior part to look like it's being used, so maybe we should highlight this part to sort of imply that it's being worn down from use. Something like that. Might have gone too far with that. Well, we can always take it back later. Let's just see how it looks if we highlight it a bit more. Again, it's good to experiment. We can always paint over it later if we don't like the results. Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'm going to take more of the blue, the Night Haunt Gloom color. Kind of work it back and forth. Because I guess technically this part of the blade should be darker because it's not getting used. And then the interior here should be lighter. So maybe something like that. Looks more natural. Yeah, that's a bit better. I'll let that dry. We can highlight the other parts while that dries. Or maybe we don't let it dry and we work in some of this white color. While it's drying. You want to blend it. Yeah. It's kind of a fun look. Okay, well, we'll come back to the blade later. I feel like I'm fixating too much on it. So let's highlight the other parts of the armor with our pale blue. This will kind of give everything a pale blue light to it, which is perfect for a cave-dwelling creature. Okay. I'm just going to highlight the edges of the armor with this color. Anything I think would catch the light. Helps to give some variety to the texture as well. Something similar to the underside of the blade here. The underside will be a bit darker because it's turned towards the ground, so we won't highlight it as much, but it's kind of a cool look. Okay, so with those highlights done, I think I'm going to use, where is it? I'm going to use some Reikland Flesh Shade, which will add a little bit of warmth to the gold metallics. I find it really helps a lot of the gold colors pop. It can also be good for kind of a rusty color too. And because the base of this color is an orange, it's gonna contrast really nicely with the blue. Yeah, you can see how that really brings out the colors in the gold. Can be pretty liberal with its application. And a little bit got onto the guards, which is fine. It's just going to look like rust. We might add a little bit to all the parts of the armor, so it's just going to look like rust. Yeah, that's a fun look. Love that. I might even go ahead and add a little bit to the blade to show that it's kind of rusting a little bit from use. Not all over, just little bits. And this would probably be a good shade for the weapon, the haft of the weapon as well. So put it over top of the wooden parts there. Okay, so we'll just continue. I'm going to put it pretty liberally all over these golden parts, and then sprinkle it in on the silver parts. I find the trick to making a nice looking metallic armor is to just add a lot of layers of variety, a lot of washes, a lot of non-metallic colors to give you a lot of variety. So that's a pretty nice look. You can see the Reikland flesh shade really brings out a lot of the colors in the armor. We get some nice contrast between the blues and the oranges, reds and the greens. I just took a little break and let all the colors dry on the miniature so you can see what we're working with. And I think before we take the armor any further, I want to nail down what the other colors are going to be, because that's going to affect how I treat the rest of the armor. So I'm going to put a couple colors on my palette. And these are just the colors that I've been using for the rest of the army, which is vermilion, orange red, blue green, and maybe a small amount of Warlord purple, aka magenta. So I'm just going to add a little drop of glaze medium to each of these colors. And then I'm going to paint all the mushrooms and the other parts of the miniature, just so that we can get a better grasp on what the final colors are going to look like. Sort of our palette. Okay, so I'm going to start out by painting the mushrooms on maybe the biggest mushrooms first. So I think we could use a nice big red mushroom in the front. Very iconic look. I'm just glazing the colors on here. Okay. Yeah, having these colors on here is really going to help us kind of get a gist of what the final figure is going to look like. Okay, it's looking pretty good. So I think next we're going to paint the next one orange. I like the goblin models with a lot of mushrooms on them. Painting all the mushrooms different colors can really give it a nice kind of fairy tale fantasy vibe. And I might actually put a little bit of orange onto the red one just to give it some variety. Never want any of our colors to just be monotone. It's nice to just mix some color variety into everything we do. Nice. Yeah, the figure, you can see that sort of contrast is really helping the figure come together. So I think I'm going to paint this sort of larger mushroom monster thing with the eyes. I'm going to paint that Warlord purple, which I think is kind of an appropriate color for this kind of creepy looking thing. Gives off kind of a, this color gives off kind of a poison kind of vibe. And yeah, it's looking good. Again, I might mix some of the magenta into this red one too, just to give it again some variety. Alright, so those are the main mushrooms. And I think for the mushrooms on his back, we'll probably use the same 3 colors, just in a different order. So maybe we'll go red, magenta, maybe have one blue one. And then maybe we do, our last one will be orange, I guess. You can see how quickly that we can really bring all the colors together with, because we've already done our underpainting, like a lot of the shading is already built into the figure for us. Okay, so now that that's done, I think I might base coat the mushroom stalks. And I think the color we're going to use for that is dark sand. So just put a bit of that on my palette. And using some glaze medium, and we're just going to spread that on. It's a nice mushroomy sort of color. But we don't want to lay it on too thick because we want to maintain our undershading. So just putting it on there really thinly. It's quite a fun figure. I was really looking forward to painting this. This is actually a commission piece that someone paid for on my Patreon. So I don't get to keep this figure. But I might buy another one so that I can have one for myself. For my own Gloomspite Gitz army. Just a really fun figure. Okay, let's paint the back of the mushrooms. We want to avoid the color seeping into these cracks too much, because we want those crevices to remain pretty dark. But we'll probably be putting some washes on there after anyway, so it's okay if it gets a little bit in the cracks. Okay. So I'm going to use this same color to paint the little dots on the main big mushroom here. And use a little bit of it to highlight the other colors too while we're in here. I really like these sorts of cream colors, pale sand, dark sand. They're really versatile. You can use them to highlight a lot of different things, and it looks pretty good. I'm just going to continue painting these. Some highlights. Might also use this to highlight the flesh. Just the knuckles. Paint the eyes. The eyes are already pretty good, but and I think I might use a little bit of this color to highlight some of the armor while we're in here. The gold armor will look nice if we add these highlights. think I've already said this before, but I think metallic colors can really benefit from non-metallic highlights. It's really easy to do with armor like this that's kind of supposed to look rusty. You can kind of get away with all kinds of variation in the metal. Like, yeah, I think that looks quite good. Gives it a lot of nice variety. Just trying to bring out some of the highlights, add some kind of scratches to the armor. Yeah, I like how that looks. I do the same thing to the other areas with this color on it. Just use this color to highlight everything. I think one of the common problems with using true metallics is it's really easy for the figure to get too dark, like low contrast. So I think it's really important to focus on really bright highlights. It's those really bright highlights that are going to help it read as metallic. You can sort of see here too that you don't need to, like, I'll often use the same color for all of the highlights on a figure. Like, I'm not using a brighter green or a brighter gold, like I'm just using this as the highlight color for a lot of the different colors on the figure. And then I can always go in and add a colored glaze over top to bring it in line with the other colors. So you can really do a lot with just a nice cream color. I might paint some. I think I'm going to try and bring out some of these wood grain highlights. It's nice looking. Some highlights on the blade with this color. Oh, and I guess we should paint the rest of the mushrooms up here with this color too. So I'm thinking at this point, I kind of want I feel like the thing that's most lacking here is the weapon. And I think I'm going to do what I've done with a few of my grots and paint it this color. Or at least part of it this color. Helps it stand out more. Brings it more in line with the other colors on the figure. So at this point you can't really tell there was any metallic paint underneath, but sometimes you have to try a couple things before you get the kind of result you're looking for. And I think what I might do is just use the really dark red color we have here to add some rust marks. Give it that metallic look. How we feel about that. We feel pretty good about that. That looks good. I like that. So the blade looks really rusty because it's been used a lot. Because this is a glaze, it's a nice transparent color, so it's not too strong. Yeah, I like that a lot more. I might even give that treatment to some of the other parts of the armor. Before we do that, I'm going to use some pale sand. To just edge highlight the blade. Pick out little parts here to give it that metallic feel. And often when you just have little specks of light on an object, it can really feel metallic. And a good way to do that is an edge highlight like that. I'm just going to add some lines here. Because I find that can often look right. Yeah, not bad. Looks pretty good. It's definitely more colorful than the other version. I'm just going to quickly do the same thing to the back. I'm just going to go along the back here, add some similar shading to what we did on the front. We don't have to be as careful on the back because obviously we're not going to be seeing this side as much. So I think I tend to not put as much detail on areas of the model that we're less likely to see, because even if we're looking at it from the back, it's sort of pointed down, so we're not going to see that part of the blade as much. I still want to give it a little bit of attention. This color makes a great rust color too for just picking out the rest of the armor. It's a bit of color variety to the other armor. Or even to the mushrooms, probably. So I'm just going to edge highlight the back of the blade. I might actually use this color to highlight the rest of the armor too. Just the edges, using the side of our brush. Okay. So you can see the way I'm painting this is I'm trying to kind of go from, I want it to look complete at every stage, if that makes sense. So then when we're ready to finish, it will be finished. I don't know if that makes sense at all. Like, we want to go from broad strokes to specific. So for that reason, I'm going to paint the base, the rest of the base right now. So then the figure will be technically complete, and then we can just keep picking at it and adding details until we get bored, which is how I tend to paint. So you can see the basing technique I've been using for the rest of the army is a brown rim and just some varied greens and browns and rocks on the base. So we want these to look relatively similar, like they belong to the same army. Even though this is a commission for someone, I still want it to look like it belongs to the rest of the army that I'm doing. So I'm going to start with Parasite Brown for the rim of the base and for some of the dirt on the base. And I will thin it down a little bit. Where's my glaze medium? With glaze medium. Some may say that this color scheme is too wacky and has way too many colors in it, and to that I say, yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think it looks good. I feel like the colors are all pretty coordinated. So I'm just going in and adding a base level of dirt and painting the base rim in Parasite Brown, just anywhere that I want to have that dirt feel. This color goes well with the rest of the figure because it's very close to being this orange that we already have on the figure. So it's like not a new color to the scheme. You can even use it to shade some of the mushrooms if we want. Typically I do the basing, like I did the basing for the rest of the army with my airbrush. And I did the basing before I painted the rest of the figure, but I wanted this to be a tutorial that doesn't use an airbrush, so we're just doing it. We're going to try and replicate the same look by hand, which we can do. It'll just take a bit longer. And while we're waiting for the base rim to dry, I'll put down the color for the rocks, which I had been using paints are so disorganized right now. There we go. So for the rocks, I've been using, this is Game Color Shadow Gray. You can't really tell that's what it is, but, and it's pretty thin because I use this a lot for airbrushing, so we don't need to add any glaze medium to it because it's already combined with thinner. So I'm just going to take a little bit of this, and I'm going to paint the rocks in this color. It just helps give the base a bit of variety to have like a stone color in addition to just the browns and the greens. Okay, and so I'm gonna add another layer of the brown to the rim of the base. Probably take several coats to get it to that bright color we want it to be. Okay, so now we are going to add our dark green color because I want it to look like the base is covered in moss. And I guess we want to thin that down a little bit. I'm just going to spread it on there, making sure we leave some areas gray and some areas brown. We don't want the moss to cover the entire surface. Just kind of want to vary it up a bit, varying up the surface. With basing, it's good to incorporate, or with natural basing anyway, you want to incorporate as many colors as you can to just create that variety that you see in nature. So you can kind of see the figure really comes together once we have the basing on there, I feel. Might add a little bit more. Might even add a little bit of green. Base of the mushrooms. Sides of the rocks. Before we're finished, I'll probably also add some static grass and maybe some moss to the base. Okay, so while that's drying, I'm going to add another coat of the brown to the base rim. And I just realized I want to paint the eyes of this creature blue. Yeah, that looks good. And I think I might want to introduce a bit more blue into the chest plate here while we're at it. So I'm waiting for that green to dry so that we can dry brush some brighter green onto it. While we're waiting, I think I might take a brown wash and run it over the mushrooms. So actually, let's use Reikland Flush Shade. I was thinking of using Agrax Earth Shade, but we might as well use the shades we were already using. So Reikland Flush Shade probably work well. I'm just going to run it into the crevices underneath the mushrooms. Some natural looking shading. And actually I might put a lot of it onto this little face here. Just to help shade these mushrooms. The Games Workshop shades are such magical products. Like, I use so many of these so frequently. I definitely recommend buying at least a few of them, because they do a lot of the work for you. Okay. Looks good. And I think the base is now dry enough to add some lime green highlights. So maybe we'll go ahead and do that. So instead of using the lime green that's already on our palette, we're going to put a little bit onto a dry patch on our paper towel because we want a really dry version of this paint to use for dry brushing. So I'm going to take a little bit of it. I'm using a pretty small brush for this dry brushing because we want to be fairly precise about it. Just going to run it over the entirety of the mossy areas. Being quite liberal with it. And so this color will tie nicely together with the goblin's skin tone. So it's the same color. And yeah, we're just dry brush all of the green parts. I'm not wiping off as much paint as I typically would for dry brushing because I want it to be a fairly heavy treatment. I want the lime green to stand out a lot more than the dark green. Okay, so that's pretty good. I'm gonna wait for that wash to dry and then I might add some more, dry brush some more colors on there. But you can see the figures really starting to come together. While we're waiting, I think I'm going to add another layer of Parasite Brown to the rim of the base. Maybe a bit of extra brown on the base of the figure, just to vary up the surface a bit. Okay, now what should we do next? Honestly, you could probably just leave it like this, but I think we can take things a bit further. I think this magenta mushroom could use a second coat of paint. And maybe we'll take a little bit more pale sand and edge highlight the helmet because I feel like I want that to really pop out. So maybe if we just add a few points of light, that'll help the helmet stand out. Maybe even the eyes for careful. Yeah, that's much better. Just adding a few extra highlights to the helmet on both sides. Because it's the face, I want it to have more contrast than the rest of the figure, so your eye gets drawn to it. It's pretty good. I have an idea. I think I'm going to take a little bit of Nihilok Oxide, which is a great color for just adding a bit of Verdigris to all your armor. It's just a good way to incorporate a few more colors into your armor too. I'm just going to use it to pick out these more rusted areas on the armor. Try not to get too much of it on my brush. I think that would help give some visual variety to things. Yeah, that's nice. I like that. Look like this armor is nice and water damaged. I just like to run this along a lot of the areas that have crevices or just leave spots of it on the armor. Can really help things look nice and rusted and old. Might have gone a bit too far with it, but oh well. Oh, I have a fun idea. Let's take some Cassandora Yellow. This is a great color for just bringing out, making something look a little bit warmer, so I think I'm going to use it on the eye holes. To give the impression of yellow eyes, like yellow glowing eyes underneath. I added too much. Take some of it off. Yeah, it's a great way to make things look a bit more yellowed. Might have gone a bit too far with it there, but actually is a nice way to make this armor look kind of more yellow and moon-like. I don't know how I feel about that. I guess we'll see. Can always do something to take it back a step if it doesn't look good when it dries, but I'm actually kind of into that. Maybe we'll add some in some other places on the model to help tie it all together. Add it to some of the goblin skin if we want to. The mushrooms. Definitely makes it more colorful. How do we feel about this? I think it's a little too yellow now. I don't know how I feel about that. Maybe we can take it down a notch by adding some brown wash. Yeah, add some Agrax Earthshade to dull the glow a bit. It's worth a try. Yeah, I think that helped. Might actually use the Agrax Earthshade in a few other places to add some extra shading. It's a great all-purpose shader. I feel like the figure is really starting to come together. It's got a lot of varied tones. I'm not sure how I feel about the colors on the helmet, but maybe we can add some pale sand highlights to make it pop a bit more. Yeah, actually that's pretty helpful. I might need to let it dry before we can add too many more highlights. But I think I might just spend some time going over the entire model, adding some pale sand highlights to the most raised areas. And then we'll probably call it finished after that. It's pretty good for a few hours work. I'll have to see how much time I spent on this. I think it's probably 3 hours or less. So not bad. Okay, so I feel like that turned out pretty well. I'm pretty happy with how this model is looking. I think the last few things we want to do is just highlight the base a little bit more and then put a few more coats on the rim of the base. I might make the parasite brown a little bit thicker just to speed up that process. But overall, this is a pretty good paint job, I think, for a little bit under 3 hours, I think is how much time. I'll have to check the timer, but I think it's been a little bit under 3 hours, which is pretty good for a figure with this many different colors and textures, and just in general not knowing where the colors were going to go. Like, obviously I had a color scheme picked out before we started, but I didn't really know where the colors were going to go, so that's usually one of the things that takes up the most time. And we did spend quite a bit of time improving the metallics. But hopefully you got something out of this video, and let me know what you think of videos like this compared to my more highly edited, highly scripted content. Because I could make one of these probably once or twice a week. I shouldn't say that. I mean, this took me a day to do, and then I'm probably going to spend a day editing it. So these are pretty quick for me to put together compared to the more highly edited videos, which take me about 2 weeks to put together at minimum, because they require a lot of scripting and filming B-roll and stuff like that. So if you do want to see more videos like this, let me know, because they are much easier to make than all of the other videos that I've been making on this channel. I'm just going to take a little bit of yellow to dry brush onto the base. Just to help bring out that lime green color. I feel pretty good about this. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. Maybe just one more of these. Okay, and I think we're done. So just under 3 hours, we painted a hero figure for a Gloomspite Gitz army. Not bad. Not bad at all. Oh, obviously, if we wanted to, we could take this further. We could probably put another few hours into adding further highlights and shadows, but I think it's pretty good the way it is. So I hope you enjoyed that little video, or this little video, and let me know what you think in the comments.